Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Still Searching with Jed Morris. I'm your host, Jed Morris, and today we are speaking with Drew Williams, President and CEO of Harper Fueling Solutions, based out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas. Drew is a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, where he went on to be a cavalry officer in the world's best army, and then afterwards joined the University of Notre Dame for his MBA at the Mendoza College of Business. So, Drew, happy to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks, Jed. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, let's get started just by hearing a little bit about your background, preferably the pre-military academy days. Like, where are you from, and who are you?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a Michigander. I was actually born in D.C., but my dad is a automotive engineer from the University of Maryland, and back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, not a lot of automotive engineering going on in DC. It's probably different now with a lot of the defense contractors. So the only place to go was to Detroit. And so that's where I spent my growing up years in high school. So, and I think that's given me a lot of kind of my mechanical and engineering background as having lived in D-Town. And always appreciated cars, and it's actually funny. My dad was a Jeep engineer, so always had Jeeps in the family, and I think that's what spurred me on to go in the Army and drive around on tanks, is that mechanical inclination.
Now you're speaking my language. I'm a Jeep Wrangler owner myself in a prior life.
There you go. That was my first car, and so I feel like I've graduated. So now I've got a Grand Cherokee. So.
All right, fair enough. Maybe one day you'll graduate even further and move on to the Rubicon.
Yeah, maybe. Well, it's a side note. I don't know if I could drive on the highways anymore with that wheelbase and not hearing anyone and having any conversations in a Wrangler, but they sure are fun to have at the beach or the mountains.
That's right. Yeah, comfort definitely takes precedence and priority the older you get. You're like, yeah, I'd like to hear my radio.
I want my lower back to work when I get out of the car. So I've gotta have a nice leather seat in the Grand Cherokee.
Yep. When I was a young staff sergeant, it was always about taking off the doors, taking off the roof, and just enjoying the sunshine. And now I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and the idea of taking off the doors isn't quite as exciting.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, so that landed me, and then off to New York for 4 years, and I did 5 years after graduation in Colorado Springs, and then did the 5 and Fly Service Academy wise, and decided I wanted to go do engineering in the real world. I used the JMO recruiting firm Cameron Brooks to get me a role as a maintenance and reliability engineer for a little while up in the Midwest, and then decided to go pursue the MBA at Notre Dame. So putting me in the Midwest, and South Bend's around the middle of it.
Wow. All right. Well, hey, back up just a little bit there, because
Sure.
So you went to the military academy at West Point, and then served as a cavalry officer, you said, in Colorado for about 5 years. Got out, did some more manufacturing before ultimately ending up at University of Notre Dame. What now? Now you and I, we're veterans. You went to the academy. I did not, but I trip over people who went to the academy all the time. And so, for the normal layperson, like, what made you want to actually go to the military academy, especially at West Point? Do you have a family history of service?
Sure. So sort of, probably like a lot of folks, grandfather was a World War II vet. And actually, I should say World War II vet and a military retiree. So that's why my family was in DC. Is he worked at the Pentagon for his entire career, or the rest of his career after being demobilized from World War II. So, but beyond that, I have no other family that's in the service. But again, on my dad's side, actually, my dad's the exception. All my aunts and uncles are all federal employees, I should say they're retired now, but we're all pretty much federal employees on it. So yeah, so not a lot of service connection. Like, I didn't have a brother or a sister or even, my parents serve. But it's funny, when I was making the college decision, it really came down to, I wanted a good engineering education, which any of the service academies had. And the civilian schools that I applied to, I got into a couple engineering schools. The other ones I got into the just general, like University of Michigan, I got into their um, LSA, or so I was going to do economics or something, but I really felt called to do engineering. And obviously West Point famously is the first engineering college in the U.S. And so I thought it was good. Now I will tell you, here's the funny part is, so I spent a weekend at Colorado Springs. I did the summer seminar at Annapolis. And then the last visit I made was to West Point. And I'm sure the guy I stayed with, the plebe that year that I stayed with, he's got to be like a pharmaceutical sales guy. I'm sure he's a multi-millionaire, high executive or enterprise executive at Microsoft or something, making, almost $1 million a year. He said, when you go to Annapolis, when you go to Colorado Springs, what do you see? And I'm like, hey, you see a B-52, there's a Phantom, at Colorado Springs. There's torpedoes and a mast and stuff at Annapolis. He's like, well, do you see any tanks here at West Point? I was like, well, you're right, there isn't. He's like, what do you see? I was like, statues. He's like, statues of who? And I'm like, generals. He's like, that's right, because Army's about leadership of people, and that's what matters. And I was like, okay, so anyway, so we try, beyond that sales pitch about leadership, which, not to minimize, any other service. I mean, the military overall is the best leadership development organization out there. It's been doing it for 200 and whatever many years, so they've got it down to perfection. But so engineering, leadership, and that's why I ended up choosing West Point.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Sounds like the plebe had quite an impact on your career choices there.
Can't remember his name, but I swear he's got to be some high level medical device sales guy.
So, yeah, don't fly high, don't sail the seas. No, come lead people.
Well, it's funny. So I look back on that, and when I was up in Ohio working for the chemical company, I hired so many Navy nukes and Air Force avionics folks because they had real skills. Right. And so like if I hired an infantryman from the Army, I'm like, yeah, you have no skills that I can, I got a bunch of training, whereas I can still a Navy nuke or a machinist mate or, avionics guy from the Air Force and put them to work the very next day.
See, you demonstrated your skills there because, they may have had those specific technical skills, but now here you are building the team. So yeah, leading people.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was good. So, I mean, I also think that being on the armor side and not on the infantry side, just, you have a certain level of, mechanic skills that you need, when you're throw a track on a tank, it's not rocket science, but you do need to have a little bit of a mechanical ability so you don't hurt yourself and get your track back on your tank.
So you spend 5 years mostly in Colorado as a cavalry officer. And
yeah, one of those years was a deployment. So.
Oh yeah, of course. Oh yeah, that makes sense. So
I say that because because nowadays there's no one's people are going to Poland for 9 months, which I'm jealous. But obviously with your and I's time, if there wasn't at least one deployment in there, then you'd be shocked.
Yeah, don't even get me started. I deployed twice as an Air Force finance troop, and at the time. My brothers, both in the Marines, both avionics. Like one of them was an avionics technician, the other did communications, and they did deployments, but they went on these like Pacific tours where they go to the island, do all these exercises, and experience the fun stuff. Whereas like I'm sitting in Qatar for 6 months, like sweating my butt off. So anyway.
Yeah, it's different strokes for different folks, but anyways, I say that just because it's crazy nowadays that there's not this constant, that people don't have patches anymore. It's weird.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny how, like, when I first got in, it was the opposite. Most of the older guys, none of them had patches at all,
Yeah.
And I remember going through basic, and my instructor had told me, he's like, you guys are you need to be prepared to deploy within 6 months of getting your first duty station. And I was like, there's no truth to that. And sure enough, I was gone within 2 months. I was
I think any 03 or any like E6 or above that didn't have, or even E5 above that didn't have a patch, you back in 2006, to 2010, it's like, what were you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
So
okay, So fair enough.
Anyways,
You're in Colorado 4 of those years, home duty, 1 of those years deployed. Um, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you went to the West Point because you wanted that engineering school experience, and the military was a way of doing that. And so you never considered being a 20-year guy. You always knew you were kind of going to do your one term and then kind of get out, right?
um, I I think it was a play it by ear, right? More or less. I mean, I think the decision. So I was also kind of we were on the surge. So we were Iraq surge folks, and we got home and immediately Afghanistan surge was happening. And but this was also at the time when the army was like, hey, we also need to remember how to fight the Russians and the Chinese. And so we know you're on the patch chart. You're going to go walk, the Arghandab Valley in Afghanistan. But by the way, we want you to do a full high intensity conflict train up and do gunnery because you're tankers and that's what you guys need to know. And we can't forget about it, which I get. But that just meant that our entire year that we're supposed to be home, we were now out in the field doing gunnery, right? And
Yeah.
I had my wife and I, who's also was in the army. Um, we had both our boys. Nathan, my youngest, was just born, and so we had two small kids. And I remember we were lucky. We lived at an Air Force base, so we learned on where the good living was. And so we lived at Schriever Air Force Base, and the kids were going to the Child Development Center there, and we ended up having to write a waiver because we're both officers for our kids to be in daycare for 60 hours a week. And my wife and I looked at each other and said, our kids only have one dad, our kids only have one mom. I love the service that we did, but like this is not the life that we want for our family. And
Yeah.
and so yeah, so it was more or less played by the ear. Wife and I had a long, detailed thought. We thought like maybe she gets out and then I stay. She hated. She didn't hate. She knew she was out after 5.
Wasn't the right fit is the right way to say it.
Yeah. She enjoyed it, but she knew she was done. Where I was kind of, on the fence post. So, anyways, well, I guess the moral of the story is, I enjoyed the engineer. I enjoyed engineering. I had actually almost branched engineers so I could go in the Corps of Engineers. After I did kind of my combat time as a junior officer. But I had always. My dad had give me Harvard business reviews, and I remember being a Chrysler guy. He gave me Lee Iacocca's book, right? And so I got a little taste of the business side of the world. And he was also a subscriber of Business Week for, I don't know, forever. And so I'd always read those type of articles, and it kind of spurred me on that. I said, hey, you know what? Let me go try my hand in the greatest economy of the world. So that was kind of what the pull was.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a story that resonates personally with me, and I think with a lot of people. When you're kind of in that 6 to 10 year spot in your service time, and you're married, you probably have a couple of young kids, and you're looking at, hey, do I want to keep my kids in the CDC for 60 hours a week, or do I want to take advantage of this a little bit and step back and put the family first? Yeah, it's a big decision. I see a lot of people making that same choice because it's tough.
And I don't know how dual military couples do it. We had a couple of mentors that were both lieutenant colonels, and I didn't see it. I mean, they made it work. You could argue that they were kind of before all the deployment times, but God bless them, and to the military brats that are halfway successful, if not great kids out of it, with both parents serving. But yeah, it just wasn't something that we did, and I just felt like that the economy was calling.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. It's what's right or wrong, for you and your family in that specific situation. So
sure, and also hindsight is, I was asked, to consider coming back and teaching at West Point, which is at that point was a good way to kind of, I call it taking the knee, but a little
that's pretty incredible.
And yeah, well, I mean, so that, I mean, there's also a lot of other things in the Army that I guess I didn't fully appreciate that you could do that wasn't like, well, I guess part of the problem, and you probably saw this in the Air Force, and I'm sure it's the same in the Navy, is everyone has to end up, commanding a battalion. Everyone has to command a brigade. You need to strive to be a division commander, right? I'm sure in the Air Force, like, hey, if you're an NCO, you need to be a superintendent. You need to be a squadron superintendent, right? You have to be, your group superintendent, stuff like that, right? Whereas there's some people that like, no, I just want to be an IT guy, or I just want to be, a planner or a strategist or whatever else, or a teacher at academy, or a teacher at the war college or something. So, I probably didn't, I probably didn't fully appreciate or talk to more folks about it. That may have what kept me, because I just knew that I was like, yeah, maybe I'll do company command. But I was honest, and I said, I have zero desire to be a battalion commander. And so that was like, if I don't want that, and the big army is telling me like that I should want that, I think that disconnect, also led me to think about going to the outside.
Yeah, it's a misalignment of where you want to go. But that's actually a really good insight though, because we never make decisions with perfect information. It's really important to kind of see, all right, well, if I go this route based on what I know, what career path am I setting myself up for? And when you can see, the lieutenant colonel 10 years ahead of you and say, all right, that's my future, that's where I'm headed. And then you get to make a decision. Do I want that? And there's no guarantee you're going to get there, but that is kind of the milestone. That's the flag in the sand, And so, you may not always have the right information or all the information, but you just make the best decisions you can with what you have. And I was like you. I remember looking up one day, I was a 10-year master sergeant, and I was like, all right, well, I can either keep moving down towards this chief road and be like this individual 10 years from now, or I can commission and, go down the Mustang route and be like this captain in a few years. But I knew it was very clear what those paths looked like. There's nothing wrong with them, but not for me.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. And to each their own. And, God bless the people that want to make it occur and do well with them.
Yeah, exactly right. All right. So you decided to get out. As you're transitioning out, what was that process like? Do you feel like you were prepared for it? Do you feel like, it was just bumping your head in the dark left and right? Looking back on your previous self, what's one or two pieces of guidance you would have gave yourself?
Sure. I wish I would have talked more with the folks that had gotten out a year or two ahead of me, some of my buddies. I wish I'd have picked their brain more. I guess so I got out in 2011. There wasn't a lot of, LinkedIn had just come out. Some of those mentor opportunities were still kind of new, like Veterati, which I think just closed down, but some of those other, like ACP was just developing. I think it would have been nice to have a mentor to help guide me on some of it. I think would have been better. But I tell you what, I was also, my exit was pretty fast because, like I said, my unit was going to Afghanistan. When I told them that I was resigning, it was, get Captain Williams off the books as quick as possible because we need, someone in that seat to deploy.
Yeah,
which I get it, right? I mean, and it's like, I don't be selfish. You'd be like, well, I should have taken my time. But the reality is, big army and the world needed, some of the backfill me. So, and so I will tell you, like the Cameron Brooks, their development program that they have, right? That's kind of their proprietary reading list and workbooks that they have. Did a great job of getting me ready to transition out. They had us read like Lean Thinking. It's another one, like Financial Intelligence for Managers, which is a Harvard Business School book. Strategic Selling. Anyways, kind of like your fundamental. If someone gave you 10 books and say, read these, it's like a mini MBA is, what some people call it. But if you read these 10 books and get these, 5 or 6 items per book, you'll be able to speak the language and talk intelligently at interviews. Then you'll be a success. And so going through their process, I think really helped me to get at least my mind right and be able to talk the lingo that folks at the numerous. And I'll be real, like I spent 2 days, I had 12 interviews in 2 days. I mean, that time of, compressed timeline, you can only get through those type of their model, right? And I was in front of Goldman Sachs. I was in front of Ernst and Young. The company that I ended up signing with, the Linde Group, is the largest industrial gas manufacturer in the world. So I mean, they Boston Scientific. I'm trying to remember who else I had, but anyways, I had some really great large companies that were looking for talent, and I had 12 interviews. Ended up having 3 kind of follow-up interviews after out of those 12, and then then end up signing to go be a maintenance reliability engineer up in Wisconsin with Linde. So so anyways, that really prepped me, I think. Did it. Nowadays, with the internet and job boards and LinkedIn and stuff, could you do some of that yourself? I think you could, a little bit easier. But again, a lot of like the Amazon Pathways, or like Johnson Johnson has the military rotation program. Those are still in the infancy, right, on it. So, I mean, you could probably figure out themselves, but in 2020 or 2011, the Cameron Brooks program was great.
Yeah, the fundamental process remains the same though. Like finding somebody who can be a solid mentor for you, whether free or paid, and identifying somebody who's like, just a few steps ahead of where you want to go. Then that really takes a responsibility on the service member to think, all right, well, where do I want to go after this? And say, hey, because there's a thankfully now, we have things like LinkedIn and countless nonprofits and other organizations who are out there to help you, but they can only help you do the things that they're designed to do. And so if you don't take the time to like critically think through, like, where do I want to land after this? I see a lot of veterans go to the MBA program just so they can try to figure that part out. And there's nothing wrong with it. That makes a lot of sense.
I hear that a lot. And again, I've written a couple posts on LinkedIn about the MBA as a way to transition out. And it is a way. It definitely is a way. It's also an expensive way. It's also a time-consuming way to do it. It's not for everyone, because I've definitely seen people, realize that they probably didn't need it, right? And again, it's something to be said about, if that's what you want to do. But if you're not going to business, then right, there's, you end up teaching or coaching or something. Yeah, you don't need it. But I think my 2 cents is, to veterans that are getting out, my advice is to talk to as many folks, whether that is your buddies that have gotten out, 6 months to a year, 2 years ahead of you, and have successfully gotten out, right? Don't talk to the guy that's still on his, parents' basement. But also then use ACP or some of those other mentor stuff and grab people's. And it's something that's not natural to veterans, right? Because we're all type A, go-getters. We want to do well. And we're so used to, I think there's also some nervousness too. We're so used to, like, if you're an NCO or a commissioned officer, and you go to, basic non-commissioned officer school, or, squadron officer school, or war college, or any of those, like at that point, you're used to, more often than not, passing, right? We're doing great. Where you have NCOERs or OERs that are, middle of the pack, we're better, right? Well, when you go into the civilian world and you're applying for jobs, like, 9 out of 10 times you're going to get declined. It's the nature of the beast. Like, it's just like folks that are in sales, like, you just get used to kind of getting, not failure, but I think you view any no's as a failure. And so I think there's some nervousness of veterans that, as they're trying to get out, they don't want to ask for help, and they're a little nervous to ask for help, because you've never had to ask for help, your entire military career, really, right? Because you're a team leader, or your first sergeant, where someone was always there to, whether it was, a slap upside the head or not, but someone was there to help you out.
Yeah, and not just there to help you out, but you're on a defined path, right? So like, that's one of the great things about being in the military. We all talk about the structure. Well, there is structure. It's a defined path. And so
Yeah.
you may need some guidance on that path, but at least you know you're on the path. And
Sure.
the great thing about America and capitalism and being on your own is that you can just do whatever the hell you want. You really can. And it's amazing how the world is kind of your oyster that way. But at the same time, if you haven't taken the time to really think through the opportunities and the possibilities, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed and just not make a decision. So yeah, it is good though. I'm excited about seeing veterans transition out and then being able to take advantage of a lot of the freedom that they worked so hard to help protect.
Sure.
Like, look, there's a lot of freedom out there. Go enjoy some.
Yep. Yeah. I it's funny you talked about. I think one of the learning curves that I had is, you're so used in the military having an instruction manual, and it touches on your point that you were just talking about. It's, where the world's your oyster is. And there is no instruction manual, right? I would go to these large chemical plants and I was expecting an SOP. Well, to a certain much they had them, but there's a lot of things that didn't have an SOP. Whereas in the Army, everything had an SOP, right? There was an RTEP or an FM or something that was always out there. And I always had to remind myself is, the Army's been doing it since 1776, right? So, you can document over 300 something years, you can document something, or 250 years, you can document something.
And not just that, the military is required to document that at the lowest level possible. Sure. Because we're bringing in people from all over the place. We have to take anybody and train them up to that level. So it's very different from having a private enterprise where I get to hire, who I think is the best fit.
Sure. And also, by the way, the military has a bunch of contractors, and guess who gets to write all these things? Is all these, government contractors that are out there in addition to it, right? So, but when you come to like the industrial gas business, I mean, the technology is always emerging. The plant I was in was built in '96, which is, compared to some aircraft carriers and submarines, it's like actually, somewhat modern, right? And then, and we were building new plants with the same basic technologies, but there's a lot of advances, and so. And every plant was customizable. It wasn't like every ship is where your F-16 models all the exact same, right? We had various anyways, we had 24 plants, and I think only 2 or 3 of them were twins to each other, and so there wasn't all these processes, and so that took a little while. Learning curve is okay when I'm trying to learn something. Again, in the Army, there was a book on how to, an FM or something that I could say, counterinsurgency, right? General Petraeus famously wrote the counterinsurgency FM in the Army. Well, let me go learn about it, right? And so I went to, the digital library, and I could pull that out. But when you're in the civilian world, when you get into investment banking, like there is no playbook, right?
Yeah.
So,
and it's great because I think you're touching on something, because we're talking about your time at Linde. You were there for about 7 years after getting out of the Army, in industrials. And you have to apologize. I don't know a whole lot about Linde and what they do because I'm not in the space. But you're working in industrials. Is it oil and gas, or is it just gas?
Chemicals.
Chemicals. Okay. So you're in chemicals. But one of the things you just touched on is what I think is, well, at least can be one of the best superpowers of a lot of veterans who transition. Because if you're, and again, some people are good, some people are bad, but for the ones who are good, they're used to going from duty station to duty station, from special duty to special duty. And regardless of what your job is, they have to learn something brand new at every single one of those stops and basically implement quickly. They have to be very, very quick, to get up to speed. And so that's one of the advantages of having somebody like yourself, where like, all right, now I'm at Linde, now I'm working in chemicals, and I don't have all the SOPs I used to have, but there are people, and there are some processes. Now it's up to me to get up to speed as fast as possible. Having that kind of experience in being flexible and self-education is vitally important.
Well, and we were a 24/7, 365 plant that was tied to a steel mill, right? And penalties were, for every hour we were down, it's about $1 million of a penalty. For non-performance. And so one thing I implemented, and I brought this in from my military time, is battle drills. And so we had if a breaker was thrown, what are step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 do we do? And if if it's freezing weather, weatherization, what's our weatherization battle drill? So if we've got, this is up in Ohio, so if it's negative, 20 degrees outside, what do we need to do before that winter storm comes? And so so we end up building a battle, just like any TOC had, or any sort of CIC had, is we had the battle drill book. And so it was sitting on the desk in the control room, and guys could flip it open and be like, okay, it's 2 a.m. I'm here by myself. Drew, my boss is racked out at home. Let me try to go through this before I give him a call. Right. And that was one of the things I told the guys is, hey, I'm never going to get pissed off if you can explain at the time what your thinking was and why you thought that was the best course of action. Right. And that's just like any other good commander would in the military is, you'll get chewed out. But if you sit there and you explained, hey, this is what I was looking at, boss. This was the context I was working in. This is what I thought was best. And so, anyways, proud to have brought that kind of leadership development, that mentality, to the chemical business.
Yeah, it sounds like it was beneficial for everybody because you're able to bring a little bit of structure, a little bit of contingency operations, a little bit more of those written SOPs to Lindy.
Sure.
And at the same and so that helps them obviously, but at the same time, it helps you because now you're able to test your Army experience in the private sector. Like, hey,
sure.
How does this actually translate to a business environment? What does, what doesn't?
Yeah, you know who the most frustrated with that transition was the Navy nukes I hired, because they're so used to having everything documented and triple checked and QC, QA, which they have to, right? And that's why they make amazing employees afterwards. But they were the ones that were like, why don't we have an SOP for this? I'm like, you're right. Let's
go write one.
Let's go work on it. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, especially the Navy nuke guys. It's nukes. They have to have a step-by-step. It makes sense.
Have a step-by-step. Yep.
What was one of your, so you spent 7 years at Lindy, and then you spent another, 5 years or so at Matheson after that, right?
Yeah, so I used the MBA to pivot. I stayed in the same industry, right? There's a lady that was a career services at, I think, Penn. Anyway, she name's Dr. Dawn Graham. She wrote a book called Switchers, and basically her book about is how to pivot. And so she always says the hardest type of pivot in a career is a double pivot, where you're changing industries and you're changing functions, right? So I used the MBA to do a single pivot, and so I stayed in the same industry, in the chemicals industry, but then I got out of operations, general management, logistics type job into essentially marketing. So product management is what the industrial gas and chemicals business calls the strategic marketing department. So pricing, placement, all your kind of fundamental marketing things that you would see in an MBA are done by the product management. And so networking got me into the role. And they were building up the department, and so I was product manager number 1, and got to come down to Texas and start up that department.
Okay, so this makes sense. So the time from 7 years in Lindy, and then you used your time after Lindy at Notre Dame to get your MBA, and then after that pivoting into Matheson, where you moved away from operations and more towards product. Makes a lot of sense there. Based on your career development, like you came to the point towards the end of your time at Lindy that you knew you were ready for an MBA because you were ready to do that single pivot. And so a couple of questions then. So why Notre Dame? I assume other than the fact that you're already in the Midwest. And, why did you decide to do the single pivot? And how did you kind of see your long-term, like if you're only doing a single pivot, do you think long-term, I'm going to stay in chemicals for my whole career and may move around, but I see myself as that chemical leader, 15, 20 years from now.
Sure. Yeah. So being in the Midwest was great. Like, I looked at the Michigan program. I looked at Ohio State. I looked at Michigan State. And I looked at Indiana. programs. And you know, when I was in operations, I was casually having conversations with customers about additional projects, right? You know, sure, I took like engineering economics when I was undergrad, which, you know, teaches you payback period and IRR and the fundamentals of finance. But I really didn't have that more of the business sense to do business plans, and that's what I wanted to get into. So I felt like, and I will say, you know, I had some pretty good mentors at Lindy who were veterans, who got MBAs and were in positions where I wanted to be in 10 years. And so I saw that. I was like, okay, well, if they're in these positions at Lindy, they you know, are former Army or Navy folks, then I should probably go get one. So I knew that was happening. And so the other side is, Lindy provided tuition assistance as long as I did it on a part-time basis. And so I ended up going into the executive program at Notre Dame. So it wasn't the full-time 2-year program, and absolutely loved it. And I think the executive format for veterans who also have some real-world civilian experience, I think is great, because my perception is that my teammates were all directors, VPs, and I had some chief executive officers that were in my small group. And yeah, I may have had just a senior manager title, but I was functioning as a general manager. I mean, essentially, right? You know, I had like a $60 million P&L, had, you know, 40 or 50 some employees. And so anyways, I felt like going to a full-time 2-year program where there's a lot of folks that, you know, maybe spent a year or two at Ernst & Young as accountants and then going back to get an MBA. I really wanted to learn from folks that were in the know, and that executive program at Notre Dame fitted. And then, you know, so that why there over Michigan, where Michigan State, where Ohio State, where Indiana.
Now you're going to start some battles.
Yeah, and so I mean, I felt like Notre Dame was home. I mean, that was when I visited it. Like it's you know, anyone would tell you that Notre Dame's a magical place. Just walking around campus on it, just the feeling of the vibe I got on it. And you know, there's 2 teams that beat Navy every year, and that's Army and Notre Dame. So I had to I had to keep beating Navy. So but yeah, no, I just felt like Notre Dame was the right place for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I really like how you touched on the fact you went to the executive program, because this comes back to our conversation earlier, just about awareness in general. And a lot of people, veterans included, are generally unaware of the options in front of them. You know, like you said, if you've already got a bunch of work experience, if you already have kind of a career trajectory that you know you're going to be on, then taking 2 years out and going to a full-time program with maybe, you know, people who are a little bit more junior in their careers, who are looking specifically to do on-campus recruiting into things like investment banking or consulting, may not be the right fit for you. Whereas you can go to an executive program where you can be on the weekends, or, you know, 1 weekend a month, or whatever the program structure happens to be, get 99% of the same experience just without the on-campus recruiting, and be able to continue on with your career at the same time. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's exactly what I did. I went to NYU Stern, did the executive program, and I was already like one of those senior government officials. I think it was a GS 14 at the time. And so I was like, I thought that I was going to be at DoD forever, and I ended up pivoting into big tech, but it had nothing to do with the degree. But you know, it made sense, you know, finding the right format that fits for you.
The other thing, and you know, and you can appreciate this, Jed, you know, it's the same thing. You probably thought about it at Stern, is the opportunity cost. So, right, taking, you know, and at the time, you know, I had two 7 and 6 year old kid that needed insurance and a wife that needed insurance. And my company was willing to put forward some tuition assistance, right? And so, you know, I was blessed that my parents had saved money for me for college that I didn't use because I went to the academy. But like, you know, offsetting that and keeping that in my back pocket, where the company will pay obviously GI Bill
Yeah.
will pay. And so I was able to piece together a financial thing that I was essentially, no money out of pocket and still keep some of the savings that my parents had, passed along. And so, and the opportunity cost is, your benefits and, pay. I had an awesome salary from Lindy, and I was like, why would I give that up when,
Yeah.
I can do, and they were willing to let me go for the Thursday or the 1 weekend a month, 2 full weeks a year that the program is, and, we live 2 hours away. So it was an easy drive from South Bend. But it's so anyways. So I think that my main point though is when people are thinking about MBA programs, two things is think about the opportunity cost, and that means what you're sacrificing from a salary and working while you go to school, because there's a lot of really good programs and you don't miss much. I always tell people, unless you really want to go into investment banking or consulting, like you don't have to go to a 2-year program. Consider Notre Dame has a 1 year, which is intense, and you've got to have a good STEM background to be able to do it. A decent math background. But like if investment banking and consulting are not why you want to go, then consider a part-time or 1 year or something, kind of non-traditional. And think through the money piece. I mean, it costs money.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan of understanding the outcomes, and look, there's no getting around it. If you want to, if you want to go to McKinsey or Goldman or JP, you have to go that 2-year, and not just the 2-year. You got to be in like a top 10, 15 program. Like that just makes sense. But if that's not your outcome, like if your outcome is much like yours, then there's a lot of other opportunities in there. The opportunity cost can be really mitigated by being able to maintain your salary, maintain your career trajectory, offsetting it with things like the GI Bill, lots of tuition assistance. There's lots of things that can also help you there. But then the other piece that I think that I always harp on is that, if it's an MBA, you can get that education almost anywhere. So if you're going to actually go get an MBA, make sure it's got the name and pedigree that's going to help you, wherever you're headed. So like, for instance, when people look at yours, they're going to see, all right, Notre Dame, you're a part of that community. And that's really great. And you found the program that fit your schedule and helped fit your family. Whereas like, a local state school, a lot of times isn't going to turn a whole lot of heads, isn't going to help people, pay attention to your career path. But again, it's just the way I see it. If I'm going to spend 50 grand a year on an MBA program, regardless of how I mitigate that cost, I want to make sure that it's one where it opens up the maximum number of doors for me and for my future. So
it does. The only thing I would caution is that, it just goes down to why you're doing it, right? I think people do put too much emphasis on like, okay, so if you're going to a no-name place, I always use one of my professors at West Point, he always called it bird shit state. I know that's so he wasn't naming a particular place, but he was just saying, some place of, kind of have a 99% acceptance type place.
Right.
Like then, we're a for-profit school. And anyways, I think the point is you do need to go to some place that has a solid academic, beyond accreditation, right? Nowadays just about any place has accreditation, but you need some place where the professors are legit, right? Where, your other students are of some, level of competency, to make sure that you get the outcomes, because graduate school, and this isn't just MBA, this is all graduate schools. I talked to buddies that went through becoming lawyers and at law school and even just, masters in international relations. Graduate school is all about your small group, right? And so when you are choosing, a higher level school, whether it's a state flagship school like UT Austin, or Michigan, or Ohio State, or Notre Dame, or Boston College, or Stern, or Northwestern, like the students that are going there are going to be decent, smart folks. And so I would say 50 to 60% of grad school is about your small group. right? That's where the real learning, that it's much less about the lectures. It's much less about the professors. It's much more about your small group. And so, so you want to try to go to a place that has good people that you can learn from. And again, the executive program for me at Notre Dame, I had amazing, I had I had a CFO, I had a chief sales officer and a CEO in my group, right? And it was, it was amazing, right? And watching the CFO work through finance problems, it was like watching, a maestro, right, on it. And then watching the CEO work through business plans on a whiteboard as we were talking was just like, I was dumbfounded. So that grad school is ultimately about it's all about your small group. And like I said, is watching the CFO work through finance problems, watching the CEO that was in my group, work through business plans. It's like watching Mozart produce music. And so, anyways, I was making the joke before we got disconnected, was that the one operations class, right, that I could contribute to and show my Lean Six Sigma green belt training, no one was impressed. So.
Well, I mean, it makes sense, but you're right though. Like the cohort makes it or breaks it, because like you can sit in finance and financial statement analysis and managerial finance and learn all the nuts and bolts, but when you have an actual CFO in your small group and he's like, so this is how it's applied in the real world, that's the game changer. Even if you're never going to be in that seat, because like you were saying, you were managing a P&L at that point, you were managing employees, but you knew that you were lacking some of those skills, understanding IRR, understanding the projects you're going to undertake, and then be able to have somebody who literally does that on a day-to-day basis sitting next to you, and it can help translate from the instructor on the projects for you. I mean, that's what it's all about. That's learning from your peers, and that peer group, that's really hard to put in place.
Now, and I don't know what your experience at Stern was. The downside of that, though, is that, and again, Notre Dame does a great job about making it. And I will say there was no ladders. No one was trying to push each other off to try to get a GPA, to try to make whatever the honor society is for MBA type stuff. But you do have, because you have people that are directors and VPs in C-suite, you do have a lot of personalities. And so sometimes I know folks, and it goes back to that, is, if you're a CFO, but yet, you're debating a professor on a paper, right? The professor's got to have right or wrong, even whether it's just theoretical versus practicality. So you did have to deal with some of the personalities. And when you had come to group projects, when you have someone in a C-suite or a VP that's busy, like right now, I don't know how I could try to do a part-time MBA while I was doing this job. You have folks that have to pick up the slack just because of how busy people were with the 9 to 5.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely comes with its own set of baggage. That's for sure. But in all, it's definitely on the plus side.
Sure.
You just build relationships that you wouldn't have found anywhere else. And I know for me, and I'm sure for you as well, like you build those relationships that carry with you for years.
Yep. We still meet up and go to football games. So.
Yep. So, well, and we won't touch too much into that, but I'm a Georgia fan, and so Notre Dame beating Georgia just a couple days ago, that was rough. But congratulations. Moving forward,
we'll just wait for when we're national champs. So.
Yeah, well, don't wait too long. I mean, all right. So moving on from there, you have a great experience at Notre Dame. Pivots you into Matheson, where you spend the next 5 years doing as a product manager, as a senior manager, and you're there until 2023, and then you leave. So kind of touch on a little bit of your time at Matheson. Kind of how that kind of developed your career going forward, and why you decided to make a pivot afterwards.
Well, like I said, it's that product manager role. So in the chemical world, product management is the in-house strategic marketing, reported in through the CFO. So allowed us some freedom, just like any other FP&A, we're finance department, we're accounting department, freedom to, call the balls and strikes right? While operations or sales or whoever else, had their own turf. And so allowed us to provide a real feedback on business results, right? So we were one of the few folks that, not only did we see cost, but we also saw pricing, right? Really where those two sides came into it. And so stood up the department. It really transformed from being contract administration. So most of the business at Matheson's on contract. And so because of that, then that department's usually working on things like fees and surcharges and prices and all those things. And so, but really wanted to build out and make it more of a long-term department. And so Matheson was really the only one of the 5 major industrial gas companies not to have a product management department. And so they felt like it was a need. And so that's why they brought me on. And I had actually been planning to go into product management at Linde. And I'll be clear, it was go be a product manager at Linde based in New Jersey, or be a product manager at Matheson based in Texas. And I love the East Coast. Wife and I got engaged in New York City, but New Jersey being one of the most expensive places to live, whereas I could move to DFW and live in Texas and have a lot of better cost and tax structure. I said, let's make the change and go down to Texas. So we really, like I said, high level kind of strategy consulting, internal consultant type thing, strategic marketing, pricing. So that's what we did. So we end up running, we kind of on the day to day, we would run pro formas for the sales department on proposed contracts and work the approval process to get contracts signed, to what's our customers' capacity, what do we think market pricing is as a benchmark, to like business intelligence type things. And then what I worked on is finding gaps in our network for products, and look whether we wanted to do a joint venture with someone, whether we wanted to do the business plan to build a plant, or if we just wanted to buy long term from a competitor sourcing deal where we just go pick up the product, kind of make those decisions on what we want to make sure we got our network supported for the customers.
See, I'm hearing you describe this, and you basically stood up product management as a function for Matheson. And because I know what the next step happens to be, I'm looking at this. I'm like, all right, so I've got a guy here who, he's got his Army experience, he's got his MBA knowledge, he's got 7+ years of true operations experience at Linde. Now he's got 5 years of standing up product. Is there anybody more qualified to jump into ETA, than this guy? Especially within the industry. As if, like, to be clear, like at this point, you'd already manage a fairly large P&L, lots of people, you're dealing with customers, you're setting up product, and it doesn't matter if you've done that or you've not done that. Life is a lot different when you're the guy in the seat and you own the business.
Sure.
However, you practice the way you want to play. You train the way you fight. And I can't think of a better training ground for somebody who wants to move into an ownership role, inside of that type of industry. So kind of speak to, how you ultimately decided to make that kind of pivot, because I imagine at this point you're very well queued up for senior management within, whether it's Matheson or going back to Linde or any of these other chemical businesses. You're well set up for a senior management role. So what kind of made you decide, hey, maybe now's the time, to work with some other people and take down a business on my own and be the guy?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think having deployed in the Army and been away from the flagpole, I think I had wanted to get away from the flagpole. And so, I considered, I had actually, engaged a business broker to look for a business that I could buy fully myself on it when the recruiter called and said, hey, there's some, private partners that are looking for an operating partner to come on and run the business that they just bought. And so, And so I think having mentors that ran their own firms, particularly one of my classmates from Notre Dame, who was the CEO of an insurance brokerage, he had made the comment. He's like, there's something to be said about working for the man. There's something to be said about working for yourself. And I think I wanted to get back to the peer leadership, team leadership, and that I had back in Lindy, right? Back when I had the operational region. I thoroughly enjoyed. It comes with its own pains and butts, right? HR is always something nagging, right? You're getting some text message that someone was mean to someone else, all the time. But I think I've liked going from frontline leadership and then going into the corporate and being able to, that you're only responsible for yourself. We're a small team in the corporate world, and then now coming back and stressing out over weekends and getting phone calls at 2 a.m. and the like. So, I think it was time to move out of the headquarters and the flagpole and do something where I'm my boss on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people decide to reach out to a business broker and, start stepping into the ETA space. I imagine that since you're still in the DFW area, you had a geographical restriction. Tell me a little bit about, before you find Harper Fueling, what was that search like? Like, did you actually do a very in-depth search, or, kind of what was the process, and what kinds of things were you looking for?
So, I knew I wanted service related business, right? Because maintenance and repair had always been kind of what I was under. So and maybe manufacturing, I knew I wasn't going to, buy a accounting firm, or a franchise. I really didn't want to work, with a franchise type thing. And so, I had been was a business buy sell. I had a business broker who was a veteran that said, I'll give you the veteran discount, right? So I'm not going to require any money up front, but, and I'll give you a smaller, I'll take my cut on closing if we find something. And so I was looking at DFW, but, what I come to learn, again, from another guy that I have a great friendship with from Notre Dame, is there's something to be said about just cold calling, just going around and depending what your business is, they're usually clustered together. And so I had done some just driving around, going and calling on people in industrial areas in Dallas saying, hey, do you want to sell your business? And now for me, right, I ended up coming over here because a private equity, we're a recruiter that focuses on privately owned businesses that place veterans as operators, end up connecting us. But, I had gotten to that point. And so, I had my thesis, I had, my numbers, right? I had figured out what size business and kind of what I could afford and what I could tolerate. I'd mapped out the SBA process. And I also had some folks that at least verbally would contribute some equity towards it, and that could form, I guess, a board, but whatever you want to call them, advisors, and still have an equity piece. So co-owners on it from MBA classmates. And so, it was really trying to find the right opportunity. But, we talk about a lot of boomers that are retiring, and there's a lot of them. But you really have to develop a relationship to find a good deal. Your business broker, they're good, and some people will list them. And Harper Fueling was listed through business broker, but like some of the deals are just off market. It's just like trying to find a job, right? It's all about networking to try to find a job. It's not, applying to one-click apply on LinkedIn or Indeed or something like that. Is you've got to go. And so, anyways, the moral of the story is I had done some cold calling. The next step I was about to do before this opportunity came up was I was going to start going to trade shows and association meetings and start meeting folks that are in kind of the industry that I was looking for, and take them out to dinner, take them out golfing, to really say, hey, I'm looking for something, are you interested in selling?
Yeah. Well, I think you really keyed right in on it, which is the thing that I tell everybody is it's a relationship business. It always has been, and it always will be. There's marketplaces like Biz by Sell. There are, there are brokers out there. Some aren't so helpful, and some that are very, very good and very professional. But at the end of the
Sure.
day, like you said, it comes down to cold calling. It comes down to circling around the areas that have the businesses that you're looking for. Going to those associations, meeting people,
Yep.
because you can find good deals that are being represented. But at the same time, sometimes a small business owner doesn't know they want to sell until they meet you, and then things start clicking. And so
it is. I use this terminology, and this may sound very traditional or conservative of me, but it's like you're trying to marry the pastor's only daughter, right? And so that business owner is the pastor, right? And so you've got to not only prove that you go to church and you're a good guy, right? But not only you can take care of his one and only pride possession, right? And so, especially, a lot of them have family that are working it. So you're almost like marrying, and then, they're handed off to you as a leader because they expect their daughter or cousin or nephew to keep working for you and have a paycheck, right? On it. And so, how do you do that? Yeah, you just got to impress them. Take them out to lunch, take them out golfing, and have a deep, long conversation to make sure that what you want for the business and your morals and your values align with them.
Yeah, and it's vitally important too. If you think that it's just going to be a transaction and it's clean and you've wiped away and you're all done, I would tell you to run away from that deal. You want to
Sure.
get to a point to where you're building a relationship with the seller, where you have a firm understanding of what they're hoping to get out of the deal. Like if it's a really good deal for them, what's the best case scenario? What's their plan afterwards? How much are they going to be involved? Like having that relationship, you can't fake that. You can't fake
Yep.
it. And the risk profile of not having that and not taking the time to build that relationship is just enormous. There's no amount of due diligence that's going to remove a bad relationship with the seller. It's just, I tell people,
Sure.
if you ever get that sense, run. It's not a good deal.
Yeah, Jed, you're exactly right. If you cold call an owner up and you ask them if they want to sell and they say yes and they give you a number immediately, run away.
Yep.
There's problems leaking below the surface at that point. Yep. So, any of the good cash flowing businesses, it's going to take a while to build that relationship. And, that's probably stressful for people that are doing an ETA, even especially self-funded search. It's a year, 2 years to try to find that. And I'll even just from my entrepreneurial friends that the CrossFit gym that I used to be in, the guy, the franchise owner that I'm buddies with, he sold it to one of the members, right? And that's how they found the deal. It wasn't, he didn't list it on a broker. He didn't, he wasn't out there searching. He probably didn't even respond to anyone that called him. It was just someone that had been there from day one working out the CrossFit gym. He was ready to exit. And they said, hey, we're interested, and they negotiated. And that's how a lot of these small business deals probably happen too, is it's, they sell it to, one of their senior managers, or they sell it to a cousin or the like. And so it's, how do you inject yourself into that conversation?
Exactly. It's who they know and how they can get to know you. I remember, I started off as a self-funded searcher, when I decided to leave tech, and I felt like it was very much two paths. One was you got to build the relationship with good business brokers. And the only way you're going to know who the good ones are is if you reach out to a whole bunch of them. But you got to build those relationships because you just never know when the right opportunity may get listed. And so you want to have that top of mind. You want to be able to present yourself professionally, and that's good practice for you too. But at the same time, like if you're looking at a business, you have to have an idea of what you're looking for. And once you know what you're looking for, you need to actually go search for that business, and if you're looking for, like I was looking at landscaping companies for a long time. And the thing with them is that you're not going to, cold calling is hit or miss. You're definitely not going to email them. Like you're going to have to show up at like the actual supply stores, because a lot of the owners are still heavily involved, and either them or their foreman is going to swing by the supply store. It's about you getting to know the general manager of the supply store, getting to know all the people who walk in the door. Because again, it's a
Mm-hmm.
small community; they all know each other, and so
Sure.
it's immersing yourself in that community. Same thing with
But that's how you get a lead too. Is they may
yeah,
not be interested in selling, but they'll tell you, hey, I'm not, but go talk to John Smith over in Fort Worth. I've known him for 10 years, and he's a competitor of mine. I know he's looking to exit, right? And that's another way to try to find that lead.
exactly. Yeah, exactly right. You have to find a way to build the relationship. And so
Sure.
you're out there, you're working, you're building the relationship. You get connected with this PE group who's looking for an operator, and they line you up with Harper Fueling Solution. So tell me a little bit about like why you thought that was a good move for you to step in as the operator with joint partners,
Sure.
and a little bit about what Harper Solutions does and how you think it's a good fit, and kind of what you're doing now.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Harper Fueling's been around since '72. Paul Harper's dad, Earl, started it. Paul took over in '85, and then he sold it in late 2022. And so then he stayed on, and so I mean, very, very, very traditional kind of transition, right? Is that he stayed on for a year, and so finding me to do a left seat, right seat ride, time was critical, right, for an operator. And so, yeah, and so, long story short is, we had a lot of family members that were in the business. I knew coming in, because I experienced a little bit of this up in Lindy, that when you have a major change up top, you got to worry about turnover, right? And so had to think through who were people that we wanted to make sure didn't leave, who were we needed role players that we needed to keep, and then who's the people that if they gave notice we wouldn't bat an eye. And so had to work through the personnel challenges, doing it legally, and making some hard decisions on it. So yeah, so for any of the folks that are looking, it's not an easy path. You're dealing with imperfect humans, including myself, on a daily basis, and and then kind of bringing in your own mentality, right? It was cash business, right? Family business. Paid the salaries and dividends to owners. But this, and they were perfectly happy with it, right? But now it's more of a mandate to grow. We got growth targets, and so some folks on the team may not be ready for that. So we spent a lot of time this first year working on building and building on sustainable systems that can grow. Great example is our payroll system. Our time cards were done manually. The technicians would fill them out, hard copy pieces of paper that we would buy from a printer, a printing company, and they would have them, fill them out. They would scan them on their cell phone, send them into an email, and that's how we did time cards. So besides control issues in terms of spotting time theft and those type of things, I'm not saying that we had a bunch of that or any of it, but moving over to, hey, the rest of the world's on digital time cards, right? And in fact, and we've run QuickBooks into it, has its own time card system. And so,
Yep.
With 22, 23 employees, you could do that. Well, if our growth target is 50 employees, 100 employees in the next couple of years, that's not sustainable, right? And so, and that's just one example of numerous others that we had to think through. Is a company that is functioning, that is profitable, year in, year out, may not have the fundamental things that are ready for growth. And so had to work through a lot of that, and some of that's kind of change management 101, right? I think most MBA programs, you have to take a change management class or something the like. I mean, that's fundamental change management. You got to bring your team on. You got to listen to them. You got to sell it. You got to tell what the burning platform is on why you got to change on it. So a lot of leadership strings getting pulled.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that that a lot of potential searchers touch on with their interest in buying a business, where they have this enduringly profitable business that is profitable. It's got a lot of cash, but it's an older business, and one of those growth levers is digitizing and updating and modernizing, which is very true. Like your example about time cards, it's very true. But it
erodes your margin too, by the way.
Yeah, it erodes your margin, and it's difficult. And you touched on it a little bit there. It's not difficult because digital time cards are inherently more difficult than physical ones, because like you said, your team was already taking pictures of it on their phone and then sending in those photos of time cards. So essentially it's the same thing. The real issue comes every time you change anything, is just the certain amount of pushback you're going to get, and the amount of adoption period that you need to be able to get something off the ground.
I was very deliberate because I had some folks that wanted to change everything immediately, and I had other folks that didn't want to change much of anything. And so really tried to keep a pulse on the team on their bandwidth and their capacity for change. And some things I had to push through without any consensus from the team because of timing. Like there was, anything from licensing when our license for a certain product ended and I had to make a choice, to people leaving that I had to, like the time card thing, we had to make a choice because our payroll person was leaving us. And so we wanted to go do a digital solution, as soon as we could while that person was still with us. And so, but it sounds trivial on the time card thing, but extrapolate that out to ERP systems, right?
Oh, yeah.
Extrapolate that out to, for us, because we're a service company, our tracking of vehicles, right? Our dispatching system. Yep. The other thing to think about too, and this isn't just a small business thing, and this isn't definitely not just a Harper thing. I mean, I saw this at Lindy and at Matheson. When someone's getting prepared to sell, there's no real incentive to reinvest into the business. And so when both Lindy and Matheson were quick on acquisitions, when you buy stuff, you can tell things, I don't want to say neglected because it sounds like it's malicious, but you just don't spend it. And so, here we had to buy every frontline employee, every rank and file employee, I have to have a truck, right? Because it's just like an HVAC or plumbing business. And so we were spending way too much on putting in new transmissions, on maintenance and repair on trucks. Again, they drive a lot of them, right? So you would expect it. But, we had a lot of trucks that had over 200, 300,000 miles that probably were at their lifespan that we had to replace. And so there was a lot of CapEx that was spent, buying more trucks just to replace, and keep our fleet moving. So that's something that people need to think about too, is you can go get your SBA loan, but if you're in the service business, and, Jed, you can probably appreciate this in the landscape, is people have to move to go to the jobs, right? And you got to go pull that lawnmower trailer, right? And those things break. And so, if the last owner just said, hey, run it until it dies, which is a method, but if you got a $300,000 or 300,000 mile vehicle, right, you're just going to have to go pick guys up that are along the side of I-35 constantly, right? Yeah. And it just is just a royal pain in the ass. And so that at some point you got to go try to find the best deal for a new vehicle.
Yeah, at some point those vehicles will break, especially like you said, service businesses. The vehicles break, the trailers break, something breaks, and if something doesn't break, there might be a car accident. There are all kinds of just craziness that you have to take care of that can and cannot be mitigated by maintenance. And then there's all kinds of stuff that just is going to happen. Well, it's just going to happen.
And if you're an ETA searcher, right, just one thing to think about is what CapEx do you have to spend beyond the SBA loan? Because if your tolerance for debt, if you take a $2 million SBA loan, within the first year you could have $225,000 of debt because you just took out 3 or 4, 5 truck loans, right?
Yep.
And that's what you needed to replace the aging fleet that you bought, right? So
that
that's the
wasn't
other
growth.
thing
That was replacement of equipment.
that was just replacement, just cost of doing business. And now, your debt servicing is up 10%, 20%, right? You need to factor that in. That's part of it, right?
Yeah. So I love those explanations because one of the things I keep telling searchers, I speak to searchers almost every day at this point, and there's a profound difference between searching for a business and operating a business. And
Sure.
in a lot of ways, searching is like being a startup, like trying to find that business, and you're kind of a one-man show or one-woman show. But operating is completely different. So now that you've been operating for about a week, and granted, I mean, you've had a lot of senior management experience already. Well, you've been operating for nearly a year now. What are some of the key takeaways now from being the guy in the seat, like you said, that
Sure.
I think you think are critical for people who have never been in that position to have a better understanding?
Yeah. I think the first thing is over communicate with your team. That's probably hindsight being 2020. I probably didn't communicate enough with the team. Back to that kind of change. So you got two, and so it's especially you got to do two sides. Is you've got to reassure the team so that they don't all jump the ship, that you're not just a bull in a china shop. You know what you're doing. You're doing it in a strategic manner. You're doing it, according to a plan. And so do that and tell them that, hey, I know what I'm doing. There's some confidence, but at the same time is realize that the status quo from the days of prior ownership, things are going to change, right? And so it's this duality that you have to present, is a critical, and it's a tightrope on it. And so that's been the hardest part. And I like to think that coming from, being an assistant S3 officer in the Army and then a project management professional, and, those that I got all these big plans, I probably should have put more to paper, and sold that to the team ahead of time, right? But yeah, I mean, I think that's the hardest thing for an operator is, you'll get all of the context on your search, hopefully, right? You've had a lot of the conversations, but when you get here, you're going to, one, open up the closets, find a bunch of skeletons. So know that's coming. And then two is, tell them that, and assume that you're searching, and your goal is growth, is to walk that tight line or that tightrope between, the old ways, there's a new way to do stuff, but at the same time is you're not going to be a bull in the china shop and completely, it's not necessarily a turnaround situation.
Yeah, exactly right. It almost seems like you've come full circle from that original plebe advice of leading people. All right, well, the thing I've learned is that I need to have a plan, and I need to communicate that plan loudly and clearly and frequently, to the point where everyone is just overwhelmed with understanding of the plan. That way they know where we're headed, or at the same time, as the leader, being flexible, knowing that plans change, and the situation on the ground can change, but understanding that where you're headed, and inspiring a little bit of understanding that I know what I'm doing here.
Yeah, and I'll be transparent. Is we had some lingering HR issues here, stuff that needed to get taken care of, and so I think there was some nervousness of some of the employees, that maybe their work wasn't that I was some a-hole boss solely focused on numbers and performance. But I tried to sell as like, hey, the folks that were terminated here, I didn't terminate them; they terminated themselves due to issues.
Right.
And so anyways, so I think there was some nervousness in it, is that I was like somehow on some hunt trying to clean house, which was the farthest thing from the truth. The team was great. I mean, it was a cash flowing business. We just had some lingering issues that needed to get taken care of, that needed to get addressed. So anyway, so I think that was, and that goes back kind of the bigger strategy talk is yeah, I mean, we want performance and we care about performance. We care about EBITDA, even though they don't know what that means, but they know
Right.
what profitability means. But at the same time, that's not the only thing. I don't care, purely about profitability, right? I realize that there's a human element to all of it.
You're absolutely right. There's a strong human element involved, and being able to walk the line between making decisions that you have to make as a leader and not just shying away from them because they're uncomfortable, where at the same time reassuring the team members who are staying that,
Yep.
I really do want your involvement here. I want you to be a part of this going forward. It's a tough line to walk, but it's a lot easier than going the opposite direction and just not making hard decisions.
Sure.
One thing I do want to touch on, and you said it briefly, but I'm gonna go back to it real fast. You said, after you acquired, you're always gonna find things in the closet. Now, I'm not gonna ask you to unload all the dirty laundry of the company that you are now operating. I'm not gonna do that. But one thing that I try to double tap on is that there's this misconception that due diligence, when done correctly, will reveal all things hidden in the closet. And that if I acquire a business, as long as I've done my quality of earnings and I've done my operations analysis and I've had my legal review and I'm involved and I've done everything I can, then I've mitigated that risk to the point of I'm going to be totally fine. And
Sure.
I'm not going to dispute the fact that you need those things. Depending, deal specific, not every deal needs everything, but you absolutely do need to mitigate the risk. But what would you say to somebody who, you're coming into this, you're coming in as a partner, as an operator. I assume you had plenty of capital to do the due diligence that you needed, and that your team needed to do ahead of time. What was it like stepping in and realizing like how many different things were there that you weren't expecting? Like what was it? What was the difference between like, hey, this is what it looks like in due diligence on paper, and this is what it looks like in real life?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing is, for someone that's doing searching and is under LOI and you're in a due diligence period, it depends on what your bandwidth is, right? If you're working, a 9 to 5, it's going to be really hard to uncover everything, right? On there, the key thing is, one is how is the owner's expenses flowing through the business, right? Is he, what is he or she expensing? What's the hidden cost of their employment, right? That's one of the great things about being an owner is you can expense, you can be, depending on what your accountant will let you do, you can run a lot of expenses through the business.
One of the great things about being a small business owner.
It is, right? And, every time, being in Texas, every time you see a Ford Raptor that's got a wrap on it, you're like, okay. Is this, do you really need a Ford Raptor for your I don't know, for your consulting business? But
that's called marketing, Drew. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, exactly, right. So, but yeah, I would say that one, you're never gonna, and I love your saying on it, but you're never going to be able to uncover everything. You're going to have, there's going to be accidents or lingering issues that the owner just may not out of a sin of commission, but a sin of omission, just won't bring forward until it comes up later, right? And even if you have a new entity, some of your customers that maybe it was a project you did 2 years ago come back to you and want warranty on, or they're coming back to you because you still got the same name, right? And they don't want to hear, and if you want to keep doing business, they don't want to hear that, like, oh well, that's the old LLC, I'm not responsible for that, right? No, they don't care. Yeah, they still want to do they view you as Harper, right? They don't care if you're the old company or the new company. So yeah, so anyway, I mean, I guess my comment would be for folks doing diligence, work your ass off as much as you can. Try to get as much as you can out of the owner before closing. That's absolutely the way to go. Just like a left seat, right seat ride you do on a deployment to try to uncover. But there's just some things you just won't. Now, if you work your ass off, will you mitigate as much as you can what anything that comes up be substantial that could tank your business? Probably not, because you've uncovered it. But yeah, that's where what's the saying? Like in training, what do they say in military training? It's a drop of sweat saves a gallon of blood, or whatever the saying. Yep. That's your due diligence period on it. So anyways, I think that's the biggest method, or the big message I would say about due diligence is. And I think the other, and now that I think about it, the other caution, and this was not at Harper in the least bit, but the other caution is the person that you're buying the business from, if they don't take the transition or due diligence or whatever you want to call, the initial period seriously, and they just want to exit, that should be a red flag. Your partner, the seller, should have some sort of, stake in the game, or some interest in making sure you succeed. If they don't, that's a red flag.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And, one of the things I've been doing over the past year is reaching out to acquisition entrepreneurs who acquired a business, and ultimately that business failed. And a lot of times they can't discuss that because there's a settlement in place, there's a non-disclosure, non-disparagement agreement. But unfortunately, there's a lot of lessons learned that they're just not allowed to talk about. And so what I've been doing is compiling a lot of these stories, and making them anonymous, changing critical details, but then putting them together and keeping the integrity of the story in together. That way we can learn from those lessons. And one of the key lessons that comes up over and over and over, in over 65% of these cases, and I've talked to nearly 25 now, is the relationship and engagement with the seller. Was that person engaged? Did they work with you during due diligence? Was it in good faith? Like, so many times, either they didn't work with them in good faith, or as the buyer, they're like they rationalized it and said, well, the seller's leaving, and then I've got my legal protections in place. And what it keeps coming back to is not having a positive relationship with the seller that's built on integrity. And the feedback has always been, if you can't trust the person you're doing a deal with, then you shouldn't be doing a deal at all.
Sure. Yeah. Completely agree. Yeah. And again, everyone goes into how you can mitigate that, right? Having a seller's note, right? So, so if the business goes under, that they lose out on their note. And having earnouts, right? After certain periods, keeping them on as another employee for a while. Like, you got all those mitigating stuff, but at the end of the day, if you feel like that relationship isn't worth it, and it goes back to what I said originally, is if the person, if you cold call a person, they say, "Yep, I'll sell it to you, and here's my price."
Red flag.
Right? Yeah, big red flag, right?
Well, Drew, I appreciate your candor. I appreciate you, walking through your career. Mainly because I feel like stories like these are valuable, especially for veterans who, a lot of us have only been shown like the 20 years retirement and then 20 years of defense contractor life. And so seeing how other guys and gals have gotten it done can help spark some ideas of different paths that we can take as well. So I appreciate your candor there. Do you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom you'd like to leave to maybe the other young captains or young NCOs who are considering getting out after 5 years, and they're not quite sure where they want to go, but they really like hearing your story, and they're wondering what kind of words of wisdom Drew could leave for them? Sure.
Well, first of all, if you're doing ETA, you don't necessarily have to have an MBA, right? So it doesn't help, sure. But if you're getting out as a captain or an E5, E6, you've got enough smarts about you to be able to do an ETA. Yeah, you probably need a mentor, right, to help you walk through what an LOI is and those things. But you don't need to necessarily have to have an MBA to do it. And I've got a lot of folks that I know that started their own business getting out. So that's the one word of the wisdom, is you don't have to do the MBA route. Two, I will say though, probably short of leading soldiers or airmen or Marines or sailors, right? Running a business feels the same, right? It's that fundamental leadership, achieving goals, achieving projects, and watching other people succeed is fulfilling. So if you want to get back to that kind of mission orientation, again, it's a little bit different, but that mission orientation, that mission driven leadership, being an entrepreneur, operator, ETA is a good path. Nothing to say about corporate. Corporate has its own. It is nice that you can just go home on the weekend and not have to worry about, one of your technicians, getting run over or something. And it has its place, but it's fun to be back into the seat with watching people succeed as a team.
I love it, Drew. And I want everyone to know that was unprompted, because one of my passions is exactly what you said. I feel, especially for mid-career veterans, coming out as captains and, E6s, NCOs, you find that you have a lot of experience that's actionable. But at the same time, you have a lot of youth and vigor that you're ready to go out and do something. And operating a small business in a lot of ways, really does scratch that itch of mission accomplishment, especially when you're doing it in your local community, because you get to step in, you get to be a team leader, you get to set direction, you're constantly learning, and you have the opportunity, at least, to be a leader in your community, which, quite frankly, we need a lot more of those. So thanks, Drew. I appreciate your words of wisdom. I appreciate your time. If people want to reach out to you and get to know you a little bit better, what's the best place to find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. As Jed knows, I post regularly on there. I keep up to date my DM. So find me, Drew P. Williams, LinkedIn, and yeah.
Okay, great. And we'll list that down in the show notes as well. Thanks again, Drew. Appreciate having you on, and best of luck to you going forward and at Harper Fueling.
Thanks, Jed. Appreciate it.